Please like and leave a heart. Please.
There we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Vidor Locksmith Show. I'm your host, David Gibson, where we are unlocking the secrets to success in the oil and gas industry. One interview, one technical presentation, and one technical screw up at a time. Thank you guys all so much for being here with me on this Friday. I feel like death. I don't know if you guys can tell in my voice. I'm a little under the weather. I don't feel the best, but the show must go on. I've had an absolutely fantastic week, and I want to be able to close this out for you guys the right way. I was seriously right there on the verge of being able to call, I guess, one of my other live streaming friends, I don't know, Keith, JP Warren, Maciel, somebody, to be able to maybe possibly step in and host the show today. But I've got some orange juice, a cough drop, and some medicine in me, and I'm feeling a little bit better. So anyways, thank you guys all so much for being here. Let us know where you guys are watching from. Love to be able to give everybody a shout out here on the show today. We've got an absolutely amazing show for you guys. We're going to be learning a lot about mudlogging, something that I realized I did not know really anything about. As some of you may know, I started investing in some oil and gas wells, and I started getting mudlog reports back, and reading over them was like Chinese algebra. So couldn't really understand them. So I thought, what better way to be able to educate myself and the industry, and to reach out and tell everybody, hey, let's do a show on it. So Duncan Blue, who will be the guest on today's show, reached out and said, hey, I can do it. So here we are, ready to be able to go. All right, I got a message here from Tracy. She's not in the office today because, like I said, I'm sick, and I want to make sure she's not telling me anything important. Everything okay? Everything looks okay. So all right, if everything is going through okay, let me know. This is my first time ever sitting down for a virtual one, so I feel bad about that. It's a little bit of professionalism on my part that I'm lacking, but here we go. So tuning in today, we definitely have Mr. John DeWart, who I guess I will see in 2 weeks, hopefully, if you're going to be down at the SPE IADC event in Galveston, Corpus, one of the two. Thanks for being here, sir. Good morning. Then Mike Journer says, is this the right place? Like I said, I don't know if it's the right place, but it's definitely not the wrong place. So glad you're here. Thanks for being here. Sora says hello from Joel Consult. Hello. Thanks for being here. Paul Moore says hello from the Permian. Guys with the vibration technology tuning in. Thanks for being here. Robert says he's tuning in from Tomball, Texas. Thanks for being here, Robert, as always. David, are you attending SPE DSET's IADC Art Symposium in Galveston Monday, March 4th? Hope to see you there. I hope so. I will be next week. I will be in Alaska. Then I get back, and then I got to turn right back around and travel again. And then the week after that is spring break, so it's going to be a lot of traveling. And so, just kind of guess depends on how I'm feeling and how the kids are faring with it. I do know this: on Tuesday at the symposium in Galveston, I have my paper presentation, and then I have to leave to be able to go to my daughter and son's science fair presentation. So that'll be a lot of fun. Mike Journer tuning in from Vernon, Texas. Thanks for being here, sir. Shrikant tuning in from Canada. Thank you for being here, sir. All right, you guys, today's show is brought to you by AI Driller. So if you would put in hashtag AI Driller into the comment section, for your chance to be able to win a 3D printed drill bit. Mr. Duncan Blue's also got some swag from his company that he's going to be giving away, as well as soon as I can nail down the guys at AI Driller, we'll get some more swag from them. I stopped by their office not too long ago and stole a whole bunch to be able to give away, but we already gave everything away. So we'll get some more. Can't promise it's going to be there right away, but at some point in time, we'll get some. So, all right, guys, here's a quick video from our sponsor over at AI Driller. Be back with you in just a second with our guest of the day. Girl, I want to hear you whisper it. Girl, I whisper it. Girl, I want to hear you whisper it. All right, and that was special thanks to our sponsor of today's show, AI Driller. Huge thanks to those guys. Give them go over to the website, give them a looky-loo. Check out their LinkedIn if you haven't already. Please do follow them. All right, on with today's show. We're going to make this a little bit quicker than normal, just because, like I said, I'm not feeling too well, but no excuses. We are going to do today's show. Back for a second time here on the Vidor Locksmith Show. It is Mr. Duncan Blue. Duncan, thanks for being here, sir.
Well, thank you for having me on, and thanks for everybody that's tuned in. You're not feeling good. I'm coming down after 3 weeks of not feeling good myself, but I'm much better today, so not a problem. As we had discussed, David, you and I quite a while back, like you said, you didn't, it was Chinese algebra looking at a mud log. Unfortunately, I speak Chinese algebra because I've been doing this for 45 years, so I think I know a little bit about it. As promised, I'm going to try to make this not too commercial, other than the very first slide that has our logo on it. Mostly it's going to be very generic, history, that type of thing. So unless you have any questions, without ado, I'll get it started.
All right, I'll go ahead and put it up on the screen and let you take it away, sir.
Okay. And so what I've titled this is, what is mud logging and why do I need it? Kind of answers your question, David. We go there, and we're hearing that question a lot. The industry's changed. Things are different than they have been. Got some new folks out there, and that we're finding that a lot of people are not using mud logging on some of their wells, and I've got some answers to some of that. So I thought I'd get it started. But oops, clicked the wrong button. Where is my button to click? There it is. So just to start off with some trivia, some interesting facts. Doesn't have anything to do with mud logging, but it's something I thought people might want to take a look at it. 160,000 tons of hydrocarbons. That's a lot of hydrocarbons. Basically 7,800 barrels per day, which equates out to 2.85 million barrels a year. That is a major oil leak that is going on right now that nobody ever talks about. Trouble is, it's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And where is that? It's the naturally occurring oil seeps in the Gulf of Mexico. And that happens every year. So when we talk about, we've got these problem wells, we got to make sure that we don't have any leaks. Absolutely. But Mother Nature doesn't always act right. And so we need to find out a little bit about why these things are happening. As a matter of fact, that's kind of how mud logging started. People started drilling wells where they saw naturally occurring oil leaks. So let's get started with it. As we know, here in the U.S., and that's the area that we play in at Columbine, these are the major shale plays, and not just shale plays, but there's areas that are major plays in the U.S. Our company happens to participate in just about every one of these areas currently. The only place we're not is in California right now, although we have been in the past. But we're all along the Upper Gulf Coast, obviously the Permian, Central Rockies, Northern Rockies, and then Marcellus, up into Oklahoma, the Anadarko, those areas. So it's important to make sure that you have full coverage and people can go into that. So let's get into the history of mud logging. Mud logging, we hear about formation evaluation and what is formation evaluation service, and people think of formation evaluation is typically petrophysics, MWD, LWD, wireline, that type of thing. But one of the original formation evaluation services was mud logs. And like I said, wells were drilled where oil seeps were observed. And later on, geologists, or guys who called themselves geologists, maybe didn't have a degree, but they liked to look at rocks. They had a magnifying glass and they looked at rock samples, and they were looking at surface sheen on the return pits and whatever water was coming up. And they were determining how much oil they were seeing in the wells that were drilling. They kept notes on strips of paper with the corresponding depth of where that rock was, and that kind of became what's called the strip log or the mud log. And so by the 1920s, we started getting into well, we don't just have oil and gas, but we have we oil, but we have gas coming up here as well. So we wanted them to start measuring how much gas there was and what was happening for a couple of reasons. Number one, formation evaluation. Yeah, natural gas. They were burning it as street lights and lights inside the home and everything else. But also they realized natural gas was dangerous, so they wanted to know how much gas they were having. So by the 1920s, they had crude gas traps and what we call and still call a hot wire system. Used a Wheatstone bridge that would measure total combustible gas, and I'll go into that a little bit more detail. In 1940, JT Hayward wrote the definitive paper, which you can still find copies of, continuous logging at the rotary drilling wells. And after 83 years, very little has changed in the concept of that. Matter of fact, very little has actually changed in the basic concept of drilling. We still use a rotary bit. We rotate pipe. It's on the end of a pipe that rotates. We circulate mud down that pipe and flush up the cuttings and dig a hole. So very little has changed. We've come out with some cool technology. I helped develop some of that. I hold a couple of patents on some LWD tools and managed pressure drilling tools. Matter of fact, I would like to brag a little bit. I hold the patent on the most used piece of software in the oil and gas industry. Me and my team developed the Baker Hughes rig count back almost 20 years ago. So yeah, there's a lot of cool things that have come out, but the basic concept of the way that we drill for oil and gas wells hasn't changed much. So as I talked about, as the bit rotates, it crushes the rock, fractures the rock. The drilling fluid circulates those rock cuttings to the surface. The mudlogger, one of his main jobs is to calculate the time and the volume necessary to move the cuttings from the bottom of the hole to the top of the hole. And we call that lag. How much lag time between when that rock was initially crushed until we get to see it on the top of the surface. It's kind of funny to talk to some young geologists nowadays or young drillers say, well, we cut that rock. What is it? What rock did we just cut? Well, sometimes it may take 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour to get those cuttings back up. So that's one of the drawbacks of mudlogging, which we'll talk about. It's not instantaneous. So those cuttings are collected, they're washed, and they're analyzed. And what is that analysis? Typically and traditionally, we look a lot of different tests, and you know, from the eyeball description of the logging geologist that's on location. They try to interpret what the mineralogy is, the texture, the color, the hardness, you know, of the rock, with the matrix of the rock itself, or whatever cementation is holding that matrix together. Any ancillary minerals that may be seen with the majority of the minerals, and the percentages of those various minerals. And this description of that is written on the log. In other words, we're making a log of that. A lot of other tests can be used using a black light, ultraviolet, to determine fluorescence. Oil naturally fluoresces under a UV light, and the color, the brightness, and various other things can tell us a lot about the nature of that oil, the gravity of that oil. Cut, we apply a solvent to it, and if oil is contained within those rock cuttings, we can see the oil streaming out of that, and if there are any liquid hydrocarbons in there. We run calcimetry, a lot of other different tests that can be run. Back in the day, we used to run a whole series of chemical tests that I guess have become either unnecessary due to other reasons or dangerous. We used to mix up a shale density column with bromoform and chlorothane. Both of those are highly carcinogenic, but they had different densities, and you drop the rock cutting in there with beads that floated at certain specific gravity. It would tell us what the density of that rock was. We don't do that anymore. It's too dangerous. There are other ways of doing that. But we used to run, looking for montmorillonite, Alzarian red, and all kind of different chemicals that were being tested. Matter of fact, a good mud logging unit always had a mud scale, a marsh funnel, and other methods of doing some regular mud testing. We'd run a filter press, so we get the Using water-based mud, we get the water out of it, and we could look at the filtrate that was left behind on the filter, and we could run salt sodium chloride tests on it. So, and today there's lots of different things, but typically it's mostly the description. And one big advent that just about every mudlogging company has today is digital photographs of the samples. And here's an example of a digital photograph of some rock cuttings that have come up, and that's what the logging geologist will be looking at. And they'll describe it and look at the various percentages and what's included on the log. Today, unlike in the past, all surface measurements of the drilling parameters are collected and distributed by the electronic data recorder company. Several different companies that are out there: Payson, Martin Decker, MD Totco, several other companies that have the surface measurement equipment that's tied into the rig, and they collect that data, and they're kind of a data aggregator, and the various companies, including the MWD, the mudloggers, various software vendors will tie into that data and pull that data in and take a look at it. But in the past, the mudlogging companies traditionally had their own surface equipment that would duplicate whatever was on the rig. Sometimes for several reasons. Some clients wanted to see an independent look at what was there. They knew that mudloggers were going to take care of their equipment, and would be maintained and calibrated probably more often. But today, traditionally, the only true data collection done by the land mudloggers in the U.S. is the gas information. And there's three components in that we'll take a look at. Is the gas extractor. It's a device used to agitate the drilling fluid to break out any gas from the fluid. Some sort of gas conditioner, a device or a series of devices used to dehumidify and ensure clean gas samples would go into the analyzer, and the various gas analyzers, which I will talk about. The first one we mentioned was the hot wire. Very old methodology. Basically, it take a look at the resistance or conductivity. It uses a Wheatstone bridge. A filament is heated, and the air gas mixture is then burned. The change of that resistance in that burning process changes the resistance, and the deflection on that process of burning that gas is the amount of combustible gas. There's some advantages to it. It's inexpensive. It's easy to operate. There are a lot of disadvantages. It's easily contaminated. That filament will get clogged up and be very ineffective. It needs oxygen to work, obviously, and it only works in lower concentrations of gas. I can remember back in the day when we were using Wheatstone bridge type hot wire systems. If we got over a certain percentage of gas, we'd have to dilute it with a air mixture and have the results and multiply, and it got very complicated, and I didn't trust the numbers very much. Other systems that are out there are infrared detectors, and I'm not going to cover all of them, but all the different types, but these are the common ones. It uses a source of infrared light through an optical filter at the right wavelength and the optical infrared receiver. So the gas flows between the transmitter and the receiver. The molecules of the hydrocarbon absorb some of the infrared energy, and the system detects the drop in the infrared energy, which is then related to the quantity of gas. Relatively inexpensive, pretty robust. Again, it has its drawbacks. Its accuracy, it can be very good if it's calibrated properly and set up properly, or it can be kind of messy sometimes. The flame ionization detector, typically used in a chromatograph. And a chromatograph, difference between a chromatograph and a total gas is just the total combustible gas. whereas the chromatograph uses a column of a certain length that's packed with a material that separates the various hydrocarbon molecules, that allows the smallest to the largest go through at different speeds. So think of it as a tunnel that's packed with stuff, and a motorcycle can go through faster than an 18-wheeler. But the speed at which they go through that tunnel is separates those molecules, so that the analyzer itself, which is not any different than it uses a flame ionization to give us the measurement, it breaks down into the various components, and it's combusted with a hydrogen flame, and the carbon ions are collected, and the response over the time indicates the amount of that various species. So by knowing the components of that hydrocarbon, which typically we're looking at the alkane series, can go from dry, which is just methane, to wet, which is all the components, all the way up to traditionally FID in field use will go up to C5, C6 maybe. I've worked on some that go up to C12. Takes a little bit longer, a lot more complex, but it can tell us what the types of hydrocarbons that we're encountering, whether it's just a dry gas or a condensate, or whether it's oil, and you can see the gas, oil, water horizons, and so it's a pretty powerful tool, and its accuracy is very good. Kind of the newest on the scene, and it's not anything new by any means, is a mass spec system. What it does is measures the mass to charge ratio of the various ions. You would think it's similar to a chromatograph, but it's different considerably, because it's only looking at the mass to charge ratio of the ions. It's not actually separating the ions, but by knowing those mass to charge ratios and the components of those, we can then start determining what type of gas we're looking at. So the sample's bombarded with electrons, the resultant ions are separated based on their mass to charge ratios, and the results are displayed as a spectrum. The beauty of it is it can be extremely fast. It can go up to very high mass charge ratios. So it's it can be very good. The disadvantages are because nitrogen is so prevalent. What is it? 70% of the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen. Some of the components of the nitrogen components often swallow up, or the hydrocarbons get swallowed up in the noise with the overabundance of nitrogen, 78% in air. So you have to be careful about that one. So it's various things you should look at. I guess one of the important things that is greatly improved the life of a mudlogger and consistency is the fact that logs are computerized nowadays. So there's some very good log plotting packages that are out there that can plot vertical, horizontal logs. What we used to call bendy logs, where it would actually show the change in the angle of the hole. But a good log customization can be any curve can be plotted on any track, and any data can be plotted out there based on the customer's needs. At one time, these were all hand drawn. I could use a Leroy set probably faster than I could type when I first started in the industry. I don't even know if anybody knows what a Leroy is anymore, but it was like a little ruler with the letters, and with a pen that would put ink on the paper. You would have to use to print copies of that. You use a blue line printer, which a lot of ammonia specific paper, and you'd run the original through it on the paper, and it would make a print of it. To me, it was the best way to get rid of a company man that was sitting in my logging trailer. I'd break out the ammonia, and he'd immediately leave. So anyway, so a good mudlogging company typically should have a pre-spud meeting with the ops geologist and the driller to determine what logs they want, because they're so flexible and the data is available. The formats can be changed and should be changed, and it needs to be looked at, and so meet the customer's needs, and then where to send those logs once they're produced electronically, which is a great help, because real time when I first started was about once a week when the boat came by the rig to pick up the logs. Today, real time can be once a second or faster, but traditionally, if they want the prints, we traditionally send out updated copies of logs about twice a day. So there are other things that a good mudlogging company can provide for you. We start getting into the advanced geosciences, and a lot of these can be done on site. Some of them can be done in the lab based on drill rate, based on speed of delivery, based on when it needs to be there. We talk about X-ray fluorescence, X-ray diffraction, isotube samplings, isotubes, isojars, and we can do gas mass spectrometry. So these are all things that can be available real time in a mudlogging unit, or what we call near real time. There's other things that are also available today: pyrolysis, scanning electron microscopes, which sounds silly, but when I was with a major service company running their global mudlogging business, the big red one, we actually bought several scanning electron microscopes to be placed in at the well site. Now that I look back, it's probably a silly waste of money, nearly $1 million a piece, but that's okay. But all of these higher orders of mineralogy can be effectively run in labs, and they can be turned around very quickly. But the major key for these types of things is how the proper sampling techniques. Are our loggers and sample catchers grabbing the samples properly as they come up? Do they have the lag calculated properly? Making sure that we can associate those rock cuttings and the gas that's being entrained in the drilling fluid associated with the proper depth. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But let's get the cold hard slap of reality in U.S. land drilling. Ideally, a geologist would love to see thousands of feet of conventional core. I don't know how much coring is done nowadays, probably a lot less than obviously desired, because core is the ultimate best answer. It's the real rock of the formation that you're seeing, good depth correlation, but it's extremely expensive and it's extremely time consuming. So that's not going to be happening in U.S. land operations very much anymore, other than if a client is moving into a new area or they have some new science that they need to look at. Next would be lots of sidewall cores. So yeah, if you could grab sidewall cores, that would be great, because again, it's a smaller type of core. Instead of a 6 or 8 inch core, you're looking at 1.5, 2 inch plugs. But again, a lot of different tests can be run on the real rock. But again, it's too expensive, and sidewalls have traditionally been run on wireline. So if you're in a horizontal well, you're not going to get very much wireline down there. LWD wireline, full suite of logs, penta, combo, quad, 6 or 8 different tools stacked on top of each other. It has become too expensive, and horizontal drilling is too risky. You can lose that expensive jewelry downhole, and it's extremely hard to get wireline pumped down in a horizontal well. So the reality is, which is good for us mudlogging companies, is that the mudlog is the best way to obtain traditional petrophysical measurements. Now, when I say traditional, there's things that can be done or can't be done, because we don't run an acoustic tool. We don't run a resistivity tool. But I've got an abstract for ERTEC. Still haven't found out if I'm being accepted yet, with a couple of our partners, that we're looking at things that can be done in a mudlogging unit. When that's what the blue box on the right hand side is, that the traditional petrophysical measurement from either LWD or wireline, and what that measurement is, and some things that can be combined from a mudlogging operation that can give similar results. Now, it's not going to give exact results, but for a petrophysicist, very often they don't consider mudlogging as a good enough petrophysical tool. But there's some things that can be done there. We can even help the drillers out because traditionally in U.S. land, the geology department is the one that chooses the mudlogging company and utilizes the data from the mudlogging company. And for the drillers, some good drillers will appreciate us being out there, but other drillers consider us a bother. But there's some things that, particularly using mass spec, that some papers have been written about. I've used extensively when I was with other companies, where using a mass spec, you can see hydrogen and ethene. Detection. It helps the drillers, and by what it can do with the drillers, you're looking at wearing of the bit, and the bit as it starts to wear out, the temperature greatly increases in the small sphere around that bit. So what ends up happening is hydrogen is released, and the fluids that are either coming out of the well bore or the fluids that are used in the drilling fluid itself starts to react. I guess it becomes sort of a mini refinery downhole, and it starts producing these unusual elements that are not normally seen, particularly the ethene, in a normal drilling operation. So if you've got a good mass spec out there, it can really help the drillers determine if the bit is starting to wear out. And the beauty of it is, if you're starting to see these indications, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to pull the bit. You can change some of the drilling parameters, reduce the weight on bit, reduce the RPM, increase your flow rates, doing anything you can to reduce the temperature around that bit, and you can extend the life of that bit. So there's some good things the mudloggers can do. So mudlogging is it's an inexpensive but very powerful data that's still available and that can be utilized in the industry that's sometimes overlooked. So again, as the slide here says, a properly used mudlogging unit can obtain data from the drilling process that the results from the drilling process itself, which would normally be thrown away, is exactly what we look at as a mudlogger, the cuttings and the gas. So you're not having to do anything unusual, anything in particular to get us the measurements that we need to take a look at so that we can help determine the quality of the reservoir that's being drilled through. The collection, the analysis of that gas and those cuttings can be used by the team. You end up with a much more effective well, and surprisingly, you can end up with better frac jobs. Know your rocks. The reason I want to say that is when I was with another major oilfield service company, our fracking division came to me, real-time anecdote here. I was in the drilling, the mudlogging division. He was, we had our fracking fellow came to me and said, "Hey, we've got customers beating us on the head saying that our frac jobs are messing up." He said, "I think we're doing what we're supposed to be doing on these frac jobs. We need to find out what's happening." So we put a team together and we analyzed, I say over 1,000 wells. It was quite a few over 1,000 wells in a lot of different basins all across the U.S. And it turns out that we discovered that the sweet spot that the geologist had anticipated is not where we were actually drilling. And it doesn't mean the geosteers were doing a bad job. It doesn't mean the maps were wrong. But we found that up to 85% of the expected zones were not conducive to a frac stage. What was happening is we were drilling into a lot of clay content that was in that supposedly flat formation in the horizontal. Well, when you go to pump a lot of fluid and a lot of proppant, clay doesn't like to be fracked. Matter of fact, it becomes gooey and it will not fracture. But if you pump a bunch of pressure with fluid and proppant in it, it's going to go somewhere. Well, very often we don't even know where it goes, but chances are it's going behind pipe, it's going into other fractures, it may be going into faults. So what would happen is the wells would come on like gangbusters and last 60 to 90 days, and then all of a sudden the bottom would drop out, and uh, because we weren't getting the results that we thought we were getting. That's when they started to take a look at some better design on their frac jobs. They would analyze the rock better. The frac jobs became more optimized. In other words, they wouldn't do the every 50-foot perf and pump. They would take a look at what the rocks were telling them. Again, know your rock. If anybody's followed me on LinkedIn, that's my mantra: know your rock. And so we ended up maximizing the good zones, and we ended up with much longer lasting wells and a lot less produced water. Quite a few years back, but it's still effective today. So that you really need to know your rock. We often hear objections about, oh goodness, we've drilled hundreds of wells, thousands of wells in this area. We know exactly where we are. Oh, it's not in the budget. We're trying to cut costs in here. Depth correlation is bad. I trust traditional petrophysical measurements. I'm not getting that. It's not real time, and the data density is not sufficient. I get a 6-inch, every 6 inches, I get a reading with my LWD. Well, what we've discovered, we need to know where we are. Rocks don't behave. Mother Nature is not always our friend. Clay is the enemy of fracking. There are times when the mudlog is the only geologic information about the well. There are no other evaluation services being run. And my contention is, yes, you have 1,000 wells in that area, and you think you know exactly where you are, but why spend the money on drilling a well and have absolutely no record of what was encountered during the course of that well? We hear the stories about where a company will sell the assets in an area to another company. Very often, a mudlog is the only bit of geological data other than the original maps that were drawn of what those wells did. Yeah, they may have, oh, it was a dry hole, or yeah, it was a good producer and it produced this much, and this is what the pressures were and flow rates. But without the real time or the drilling information being recorded, very often you don't have any information on those wells. So that's one value of it. We talk about budget. It's not in the budget. We're going to cut costs wherever we can. Analyzing a bunch of wells, we've come to we've seen where today's cost on a well could be anywhere between $3 and $5 million for about a 15-day well. And that's on average. Some are more, some are less. Mudloggers are traditionally on location on these wells for about 8 days during the lateral. So of that 5 million, if the well costs 5 million over a 15-day period, that's about $300,000 per day. Well, the mudlogger cost is approximately 0.5% of the daily cost. Well, the reality is, while the logger's on location, it's 1/4 of 1% of the daily cost of while he's on location. So it's you're by dropping your mudlogging program, you're really not saving any money. Most people lose that much money in the couch, to be reality. Depth, depth correlation is bad. Yep. A good mudlogging company, your lag is going to constantly be checked against gamma, because most wells today are drilled with gamma. So wherever we see a change in the gamma, we take a look at the rock cuttings, make sure that we're still on board with it. We're looking for any drill breaks, any gas breaks, any lithology changes. Back in the day and still today, there's a lot of things that can be used to test your lag. It's not used so much anymore, but it used to be we'd run calcium carbide down the drill pipe, particularly in water-based fluid. It would produce acetylene gas, and the chromatograph could pick it up. So we knew how long it took to go down the drill pipe, and we thought we knew what the lag was, and so we'd track that acetylene gas coming back up, and we could actually very closely fine-tune that. Acetylene is not necessarily a very safe system to operate with anymore, but I've seen people dump raw rice down the hole where it'll come up nice and puffy and white when it comes back up. I've seen people pour some paint down there, rice hulls. There's a lot of different things that can be used as markers. There's some technology that is being looked at where they will actually pump in some sort of marker gas. I know in the big deepwater offshore operations, they will actually inject gas at the mud pump so that they can check lag. We were working on a patent, and I think it was established, but there's some things that can be done using RFID chips and a chip reader, so that you could dump these RFID chips down to find out what was happening. So there's some different things that can be looked at to adjust the lag, but a good mud logger will always be checking his lag and should be constantly on top of it. The petrophysical data. All logging tools, wireline, LWD, the reality is they're using indirect measurements of the rock and the fluid. They're sending out, electrical currents. They're looking at resistivity, conductivity. They're sending out sound waves to get acoustic, gamma sources to do the gamma count. But a mudlogger is the only person nowadays that actually looks at the rock. They touch the rock. I've heard a derogatory term, but I don't think it's so derogatory. They lick the rock. So they actually look at the rock, they measure the rock, they measure the gas, they see what's happening. So if you have a good geologist on location, that person can actually do a really good job of telling you what your cuttings are. Real time, it's not real time. Well, I've always questioned what real time means. When I first started logging, like I said, real time meant once a week when the boat came by to pick up the logs. Today it can be a lot faster. But the reality is, how often are decisions actually made immediately? Very often, even if you're running LWD, the team will get together, take a look at the responses, have a discussion about it, and see what's happening. Typically, a mud log, you're 30 to 45 minutes behind the bit, so you're not really delaying it. It's near real time. And there's some things with the mechanical properties of the EDR that can be looked at and compared to various things, such as mechanical specific energy, which I'll get into a little bit later on. They talk about data density is not sufficient. I get 6-inch readings with my LWD or my wireline. Well, if you're in a lateral, a small true vertical thickness, you can be 50 to 100 feet lateral and maybe only move in that vertical thickness maybe an inch. So don't equate the density of the rock that you're seeing with the conventional thought of a vertical where you're drilling fast through it. If you're drilling, the formations are relatively, you're going to see changes, but the density is still sufficient most of the time. So what is the future of mud logging? And there is a good future of mud logging. And I kind of joke about this. The future is the past. Back in the 70s and beyond, a little bit earlier than that, and today, even in deepwater operations, there's a second component that's no longer in U.S. land operations. It's the position of data engineer. When I first started mud logging, there was a logging geologist and there was a data engineer on location. The logging geologist was the person who looked at the rocks, basically doing what a mudlogger does. Well, the data engineer was the person who collected and analyzed the drilling parameters to assist with the safety and the optimization and the operational awareness 24/7, even when not drilling. We've discovered that most problems occur at the well site, typically not when the well's being drilled. It's in the flat time. If you look at the big Macondo blowout, they were not drilling that well. That well was TD'd. It was only during the flat time when all the changes were occurring that that well got into trouble. That's an extreme example, but very often there are going to be problems when the well's not being drilled. So that data engineer has not the need has not gone away. They've reduced it because of cost constraints. Cost constraints one of them, and recently there's some very clever real-time visualization. There's a machine learning and artificial intelligence that's has replaced that position. There's some excellent software that's out there. I've looked at probably most all of it. I helped develop some when I was with different service companies. The problem is that nobody has the time or the stamina to personally watch their well 24/7. And particularly if an operator has several wells drilling, that drilling engineer in town is not going to sit there and stare at a screen 24/7. A company man cannot sit there and stare at that screen 24/7 to see what's happening. We've looked at some situations where normally 90 to 95% of the time, everything's going to be fine because that company man or that drilling engineer is watching the well. But it's when the unusual events are occurring. And by unusual events, it could be something like a series of events, like we're swapping over from a water-based to an oil-based mud because we're going into the lateral, we're getting ready to make a trip, we're running managed pressure drilling. So we're having to build the mud weight as we're coming out of the hole to balance it out. The company man is out there, he's counting pipe joints as because the new casing is coming on location. So there's lots of different things that are distracting his attention, and nobody's really watching the well like they should be, even with the best of the software. So what we're saying is that there's some alternatives by using the real-time visualization packages. A good mudlogging company can develop a real-time operations center where the only job those people have is to sit there, watch the data as it comes up, and monitor it. They can also assist in the data quality, QA/QC of the data. Is all the BHA entered properly? Does the pipe tally make sense? Does help the driller determine tripping speeds at critical depths? These are all things that used to occur by that data engineer that's very seldom done on a regular basis nowadays. There are some things that have been looked at, very useful: mechanical specific energy, based how much pressure it takes to actually break that rock down. Well, if we know the pressure to break the rock down and we know what the rock is, we can do some determination of, are we optimizing the drilling process by using the right parameters to drill a well? Are we finding the sweet spot of that particular formation? And as the formation changes, so should the MSE. Or as the MSE changes, is it a rock change? Is it a lithology change? Or have we crossed the fault? Have we drilled out of the zone? There's a lot of different things that can be done in that. Some things that some companies are looking at, including ours. So the future can be now, okay? It's shown mudlogging is a very cost-effective price point. It's probably the least expensive operation on your well that involves people. Take a look at your, work with your mudlogging vendor, open the door a little bit, peek behind the curtain a little bit more, and those things. A good mudlogging company can help obtain these goals. By the value of us touching, analyzing the rock and the gas, and again, what we used to consider a throwaway commodity, the cuttings of the produced gas, our clients then can have a better data set for fully understanding the reservoir. And as those assets are sold and trading, as I said, very often that mud log is the only thing that they have of true record of what's happening out there. So thank you for that. That's kind of the end of my presentation. David, I don't know if you want to jump back in or if you're still alive. Had a fit somewhere.
Barely. All right, so we've got a lot of comments. We didn't get a lot of questions, but we got a lot of comments throughout that. Are here. One of the quick questions though is here from Jerry Hudson. It says they don't do trip sheets anymore? ?
Well, who is they and how often, and it'll vary from operator to operator, from drilling contractor to drilling contractor. All I know is that that data engineer that used to be on location and still is on deepwater operations, they will do those trip sheets and they'll watch that. A good drilling contractor and a good operator will also very often do that. But what I'm saying is that we need to get a little bit more consistent about it. Know what that trip sheet is as we're pulling the BHA through a shoe or a change in pipe. We really need to help that driller understand you really need to slow down here. You don't want to swab that well in, or as you're going back in, you don't want to surge and break down your formation. So those are some things that can be done. And they're just, unfortunately, they're not being done as much as they should be anymore. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these wells that we're drilling today in U.S. land. There's high instances of stuck pipe, lost returns, kicks, blowouts that really shouldn't be happening.
All right. There's an interesting comment here from Mike. Back in the day, if you didn't have carbide, the rule of thumb was 1 minute per 100 feet. It was surprisingly close. Nowadays, that doesn't work.
Well, it's kind of wet your thumb and stick it in the air. It was a rule of thumb. I can show you lots of times when it wouldn't work back then too. The reality is you need to know your hole volumes. You need to keep track of it, and you can understand what's happening downhole using some sort of marker. Traditionally, even today, a good mudlogging company will try to match up his cuttings to the gamma, because the gamma is real time, and you can see any subtle changes and adjust your lag.
I found this comment interesting here. I was amazed by the nice artwork added by mudloggers back in the 1970s.
Okay. I had a whole series of Larson cartoons that we collected because we didn't, at times where we'd change the protagonist to he's nothing, he's nothing but a mudlogger, so we did have some graphics, but yeah, there were some good artsy type people that sitting in the geology chair that could do some pretty cool things on logs. I wasn't one of them.
John DeWard says, Duncan, do you correlate EDR data to mudlogging data when from separate companies?
Oh yeah,
when it's from separate companies. Okay.
Absolutely, because mudlog companies don't provide EDR data anymore. Very often, even the drilling contractors will not allow us to set up our own equipment. So 99.9% of all mudlogging companies get their data, the mechanical measurements from an EDR company. So yeah, we have to compare it. And if John means is company A EDR versus company B EDR versus company C EDR, I don't know. Without having them side by side, it's very difficult to compare. My soapbox, and John knows it well, he and I agree and yell at each other from time to time.
Such as the oil field.
Such as the oil field. But unfortunately, a lot of the EDR systems that are out there are not calibrated properly. They're very seldom properly looked at. Um, I've seen situations where the EDR gas detector is hanging 3 feet above the mud pit, spinning in the air. So no, you're not getting good gas readings because there's nobody on location from the EDR company to watch that 24/7. That's why when I was doing in the field myself, in my covered wagon, being pulled across the desert by mules, back in the day, I always watched my equipment. I would walk the rig every couple hours to look at all of my sensors to make sure that they were working properly, and I do a at least once a day calibration, sometimes twice a day. Not a whole lot of that going on nowadays.
I would say there's always value in walking the location to make sure that one of your sensor cables is not in a bind and about to be just either pulling apart or somewhat
Angling
in the
in
way,
the air, yes.
or just somewhat in the way, and somebody goes, "What is this?" And then just
Yeah.
oh
yeah.
a
I've
pocket
had
knife.
many a cable cut myself. Yes.
Yeah. Always surprises me at the rig when that happens. They're like, "Oh, this must not be important. Let's just cut it."
Yeah. It's not ours, so it can't be important. Exactly.
Exactly. Here we go. We got a question. What is Columbine's response to pad wells and the redundancy that is expected? How do you sell a company the importance of logging every foot? I should say we don't have to specifically go to Columbine, but I mean, it's a good point as far as you're drilling, repetitive manufacturing style wells all in the same pad.
Yeah. Well, they should correlate, but you know what? Mother Nature doesn't always behave either. And unless you're drilling in the same exact well bore, the data is not going to look exactly the same. So, the response is, yep, I expect it to look a little bit different than the well that we drilled 50 feet away and going in a slightly different direction. And again, that's the value of a good mudlogger on location. How did that rock change? Is it what we were expecting? Why is there a change? And very often, without even knowing that there's a change there, you're not going to be able to answer those kind of questions.
Okay. Fellow oil and gas investor here, Patrick says, please explain further about how you can see or guess if a bit is damaged on gas alone, the accuracy of this.
Patrick, is a good question. There's several SPE papers written about it. I don't know. I haven't memorized the numbers, but I tend not to memorize SPE paper numbers. But you can look them up, and it deals with a mass spec, and you have to have a mass spec. But again, it's the increase in the hydrogen that is produced. Now that could be a naturally occurring hydrogen. There's a big move on gold, what we call gold and white hydrogen now, that completely different world that I actually wrote a little article on LinkedIn about. But the biggie is ethene as opposed to ethane. Ethene is not a naturally occurring gas. It has to be, in effect, manufactured downhole from the heat and the temperature. So if you're seeing a advent or an increase in ethene, there's a good indication that bit is under stress and it is being heated to the point of where if you continue on, you could be damaged. It could already be damaged, but you can still extend the life of that by watching that gas.
Interesting. All right, another question here. If you guys want to, feel free to keep asking questions.
Yeah, please.
I feel good enough to be able to ask questions, but there's no chance I could have presented today.
No.
How does the relationship work between mudlogger and geosteering geologist?
Well, very often they can be one and the same, but a good geosteering company and a good mudlogging company, even if they're competitors, should be in constant contact with each other so that the geosteerers can know what rocks they're cutting, just like the geosteerer should be in constant contact with the geologist to take a look at what changes they need to be making in their geosteering program. they should be in constant contact with that mudlogger to find out what are the rocks. You know, you got to know your rocks. So if we're expecting to see, I'm pulling lithologies out of the air or some other place, that if you're expecting to see a shale and you're seeing chalk, well, something obviously has changed. So you need that geosteer needs to know about that.
There we go. Eric added in, yes, hydrogen was supposed to be a marker of metal to metal friction, bit or casing wear.
Absolutely. But Eric, be careful, because there's some recent articles that have come out about this new phenomenon called gold or white hydrogen. That is actually it's naturally occurring hydrogen in relatively surprisingly large quantities, that is produced from a kind of a carbonated water in contact with iron compounds, and it produces hydrogen. It may be a new future alternative energy source. And I encourage it, because, dude, you still got to drill holes in the ground, and that's what we're here all about. So it's different formations, but it's and you need to have a good geologist knowing what you're looking at and some good gas detection equipment. But different formations. Matter of fact, USGS is getting ready to put out a map, I think this year, of where those formations are predominantly on the West Coast and on the East Coast, and surprisingly, a little strip right down the middle around Nebraska, Kansas area that has the right formations and the right water content to start producing some hydrogens like that.
Shirkat says MSE does indicate change in rock properties, but it also an indication of inefficiencies and loss of energy in the drilling system, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Microphone in the right spot.
Absolutely, and great point. However, if you don't know that the rock properties are changing by having a geologist out there looking at them, you still don't know did that MSE change because of a drilling parameter change or inefficiency, or is it because of the rock? And it could be a combination of both. So that's why you need to take a close look at your rock properties. And what I'm looking at and possibly doing some research on, and maybe even coming up with something about it, where if you know the lithology percentages of various components of the offset wells, and you know from drilling parameters that have been recorded that a certain MSE in a normal situation in a certain percentage lithology, you should be able to predict any change in that MSE. Is it a rock change because we've changed rock types, or is it a mechanical change? Mechanical change, if you change a parameter, you should be able to adjust back to that right MSE. If not, it could be a rock change that could indicate a different situation that you need to look at.
Quick follow-up question here. We have Patrick says, follow-up is the gold/white hydrogen evident in oil-based and water-based mud is one more accurate to see the gas? Is it trace gas, or in what amounts?
I don't know. I read some articles and wrote a quick little blurb on it in LinkedIn. If you look me up in LinkedIn, you might be able to find it. Is an article I wrote about a month and a half ago, talking about it. It referenced some papers. The gas is produced from water, so it's not oil based. You got to differentiate between the naturally occurring formation water and what the fluid that's used to drill those wells. So it has nothing to do with the fluid that's drilling the wells. The hydrogen is actually produced from the reaction of the CO2 contained in the water and the reaction to the iron content of the formation rocks. So at first they thought, oh, it's just little minor examples. There have been in somewhere in Africa, there was an old abandoned well, had the right properties. The entire town is now being all the electricity for the town and several surrounding towns are being produced from the hydrogen that's coming out of that old well. And they said there's no way that amount of hydrogen should be accumulated, but it's constantly being produced because of the right conditions. So that's what the industry means by the gold or the white hydrogen, as opposed to a chemically induced. That's all chemically induced, but say when they're doing something with ammonia, turning it back into hydrogen, and all the greens and the blues, and I lose track of the rainbow effect of what they're calling hydrogen today. But the gold and the white is naturally occurring hydrogen that may get trapped for a short period of time, but because the hydrogen molecule is so small, it'll eventually leak out a lot faster than anything else, even if there's a good seal.
Excellent. Well, Duncan, thank you so much for being on the show today. Let's do a quick little giveaway here for all of those that are here. Let me see. It's not coming up. Oh, I got to add it to the stage. There we go. All right. Doing a quick little giveaway here for a 3D printed drill bit and some swag there from Duncan. Said that he's going to be able to give some stuff out. So who is our lucky person today? It would be Jerry Hudson.
All right.
Jerry, a show regular here, tuning in on a regular basis and watching the show. Jerry, thank you so much. Do appreciate your support and watching. We'll get in touch with you and we'll send you some goodies there, sir. That's it from me. Duncan, thank you so much for coming on today. I really, really do appreciate it. You've saved me by being able to present and me not having to actually ask a lot of questions today, because I would not have been able to do that. For everybody else out there, I hope you guys all have a wonderful weekend. I'll be in Alaska next week, so no show next week. Week after that will be the SPE conference down in Galveston. Hope to see many of you there. I know I will be feeling better by then. And I guess that's about it from me. So as always, guys, know your industry.
Yes, indeed. Know your rocks too.
Where's the see? I'm out of